Your fundamental supposition has always been that people come to the United States and drop a substantial portion of their previous identity and unite with the common culture. And that's the melting pot. And part of the payoff for that was the ability to participate in the American dream, right? And that's worked very well. In Canada, and I would say in European countries, the doctrine of multiculturalism has arisen to replace that, predicated on the idea that all newcomers, or all people for that matter, can maintain their fundamental ethnic identity, and that somehow peace will reign despite that. And I don't understand that doctrine at all, because the world is multicultural in its current structure, and that has its advantages, obviously, because of the diversity of viewpoints, the diversity of cultural products that multiple cultures have produced. But it also leads to war constantly. And how importing that in fragments into a smaller geographical area can then result in peace is beyond me. Like, what seems to me to be ultimately necessary is that everyone who inhabits the same territory has to adopt the same fundamental ground rules, because that actually is the definition of peace. I mean, look, the only reason that we're all sitting in this room peacefully, we don't know each other. Well, some of you know one another, but nowhere near as well as you think you might. And given the incredible range of human capability, we know what the rules are in a situation like this. The room is set up to reflect the rules, right? The rule is we've all come to a collective agreement that we're going to face the front, and that whatever is happening along this axis is going to be everyone's primary locus of attention. And if any of us violated that rule, so for example, if one of you got up and went into the corner and just started talking, then everyone in the room would become very, very uncomfortable very, very rapidly, because the social norm has been violated. And so if you bring people in from diverse areas, you have to embed them in a narrative that encompasses those diverse identities and enables them to interact peacefully. And I would say the multicultural proponents are naive. They think that peace is the natural state, and that you can produce diversity and peace in a straightforward manner, forgetting that the only reason they believe that is because they happen to exist in countries that are peaceful at the moment, and they take that as the norm. But, even the postmodern types who don't believe in the individual, I think believe that group identity is paramount, have found themselves shunted into a strange alliance with the Marxist types, because if you don't believe in a fundamental underlying uniting narrative, then you have no direction in your life. And if you have no direction in your life, well, you have no meaning and no purpose and nothing to do. And that's just not useful. That's another weakness, I would say, of the destructive left. And this is something of great technical interest to me. So hierarchies organize and direct and distribute, but they do something else. They also provide people with aspiration. So a hierarchy, like an actual technical human hierarchy, is associated with a psychological hierarchy of value. So we might say, well, the value is that something is being pursued that gives you the right to occupy a higher position in the hierarchy. And that which is being pursued is a value. All right, so the downside of the value is the stratification. But the upside of the value is, well, you've got something to aim at, right? No value, nothing to aim at. And so what's the consequence of that? Well, we understand how people generate positive emotion quite clearly. Now, you might think that most of your positive emotion emerges as a consequence of accomplishing something. But that actually turns out not to be true on careful analysis. So, for example, imagine you graduate from high school. It's like, well, that's a pretty good day, because for that day, you're king of the high school. But the next day, you're a young person who's no longer king of anything, who's beginning a very long road that in a very unstructured manner. And so that sense of that accomplishment as a source of sustaining positive emotion tends to be quite fleeting. Once you run a process out to its conclusion, it ends. Well, then what happens when it ends? And the answer is, well, you have to find something new. So you're in a chaotic and uncertain domain. Most of the positive emotion that people experience is a consequence of watching themselves move successfully toward a valued end. Right? And that's technically true. So there's a neurochemical system that runs on a neurochemical known as dopamine that's associated with tracts in the brain that are extraordinarily ancient. And they're activated, they direct your attention. When you set a goal and you start to move towards it, when you see that you're successfully moving towards it, then this system produces positive emotion. Now, A, that makes you feel good, and B, it increases the probability that the neurological systems that are having the success will be manifested again in the future. That's reinforcement, because dopamine strengthens those neurological connections. And so what that implies is that in the absence of a value hierarchy, there's no aim, and in the absence of aim, there's no positive emotion. And that's a catastrophe. You might say, well, that leaves you with nothing. But that's not true, because the baseline of human life isn't nothing. The baseline of human life is anxiety and suffering. And so if you remove people's positive emotion, if you destroy their value hierarchy and give them nothing to aim at, then all you leave them with is the suffering and pain. And that makes people bitter and cynical and vengeful and hopeless and addicted, and it's a complete bloody catastrophe. So that's another thing that the conservatives have on their side when they're attempting to make a case for the validity of hierarchies, and something for the leftists to be very careful about. Like, they want to make sure that the hierarchies are operating fairly, transparently, and with the possibility of movement and shift across time. But if they eradicate them completely, then, well, what do you have? You got no aim? You got no aim. It's like you're an aiming creature. You can't even look at the world without purpose. I mean that technically. Like, you focus your eyes on things that you think have value. Without value, you've got no focus. You can't even orient your senses. And so that's disorienting, anxiety-provoking, as well as removing any sense of positive meaning from your life.